All right, guys, it's time to get into what, in my opinion, is the most exciting part of Java development, although I'm probably biased. It's Java web applications. Now, so these are going to be Java programs that you deploy to a Java web server. For those of you who have done maybe some PHP or other server-side programming, um, all this stuff should seem, somewhat similar. But so the key part about getting these Java web applications set up is that they're structured a little bit differently than a regular Java program. And because of that, the process for creating them in NetBeans is a little bit different. And depending on which version of NetBeans you installed, there could be some extra steps that you have to take to get your IDE prepared. So to get started, when you go into the New Project menu, you're not going to create a Java application project, which has been the default selection for this course so far. You're going to need this folder called Java Web, and that will have a project type inside of it called Web Application. Now, depending on which version of NetBeans you installed, you may not have this folder. You're going to need to update your NetBeans environment in order to get access to the Web Application project type. All right, and the way you're going to do that is by going into the Tools menu at the top of NetBeans and going to Plugins. Now, let's see, where is it? One of these plugins that I have installed. Not showing up here. Over here and installed. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong tab. All right, so the particular plugin that you'll want to search for is called Java EE Base. Okay, Java EE is short for Java Enterprise Edition, and Enterprise Edition is what adds support for developing web applications. Now, don't get scared away by the term enterprise. It's still free, right? You don't have to pay boatloads of money to get the integration for Java web applications, but you will need to install Java EE Base into your NetBeans environment. So I have it here under the Installed tab. You should find it under the Available Plugins tab. So you scroll through here or search. It's not going to come up for me because I already have it installed. But if you find the Java EE Base plugin, check the box where you find it, click Install. It'll have to download some stuff. That'll take some time. But then after that, you should be able to restart NetBeans. And when NetBeans boots back up and you go into your New Project menu, you should see the Java Web folder. All right, so let's start off building a Java web application. Call it demo app. Web app. That sounds better. Okay. Now, in order for NetBeans to build and run a Java web application, you need a Java web server installed. Now, if you're coming from PHP or some other kind of web development, you may be used to servers like Apache, with mod PHP or something like that. Java has several options for setting up a web server. We're going to pick the option Glassfish because Glassfish debatably has the best integration with NetBeans. It's going to allow us to download and install a complete Glassfish server on the fly. Other popular ones, Tomcat, and JBoss are also, free Java web servers that are good for getting started. I'm personally a fan of Tomcat, but for the sake of simplicity, we're going to install a Glassfish server. I can choose where I want it to be located on my computer, and all I have to do in order to get it running, get it downloaded and running, is to click this checkbox that says I've read and accept the license agreement. You can click on this, it'll launch a page in your web browser that actually lets you read the license agreement. There's really nothing there that you need to be too concerned about. So I'm going to click download now. It's going to ask me which version. Might as well go for the latest and greatest. All right. Now this is going to take a second to go. My network is reasonably fast, but it's downloading a lot of stuff. And Glassfish is actually kind of overkill for what we're going to be doing for this project. Glassfish is not just a Java web server. It's an entire Java enterprise application platform that goes pretty deep, much deeper than we're going to get into here. Tomcat is actually a much smaller, simpler to run, uses less memory, things like that, than Glassfish. But again, Glassfish integrates really smoothly with NetBeans, so that's beneficial to us. And here we can leave in just all of the default values, because we're only going to be running the server locally, and we're not going to be getting into any kind of user security, so we can just click finish. All right, so now that we've created a server for our application to be linked to, we can finish creating our new web application. Just click finish. Okay. And it gives us a default HTML file, which we're going to come back to in a second. So basically, web application programming in Java is going to be a mix of HTML and Java server code, and as we'll see later on, you can get kind of this blend of Java and HTML that works very similar to PHP, called JSP. And we'll take a look at that later. But for right now, let's take a second and look at the layout of this demo web application project. Now, we have a source packages folder, which should be pretty familiar. This is where our Java code goes. We have a libraries folder, which we can see that in addition to the Java standard libraries, we now have access to the Glassfish server libraries. We've got a configuration files folder, which we don't need to worry a whole heck of a lot about. We also have a space for putting in some web pages, like this index.html file. Web page is kind of a generic term. This is also where any CSS files, JavaScript files, image files, things like that, anything that you want to be packaged as part of your Java web application would go under the web pages. But any kind of logic behind the functionality of your Java web application is probably going to go into your source packages folder. So let's just do a really simple Java web app here. Java web apps are built on top of a technology called servlets, and the best way to explain the role of the servlet in the Java web application is to think about our Module 4 project and think about the role of the handle client task. All right, so the handle client task runnable object is an object where its sole purpose, its sole reason for existence is to facilitate requests to your Java server, right? Now, it turns out when you're dealing with Java web applications, we don't have to build the entire server application, right, as we did with Module 4. Glassfish already does 90% of that work for us, and Glassfish is going to be, is basically going to fill the role that our server app filled in module 4. Right? So Glassfish is going to handle all of the incoming requests. The servlet is going to be the object that actually receives the requests from Glassfish and kind of deals with it, figures out how that request gets routed, how it gets handled, much like our handle client task did for module 4. So think of servlet like a fancy version of our handle client task. So let's make a servlet, hello world servlet, and a package, of course. It's always better to have a package than to not. Now, when you generate, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped a very, very important step here. I'm going to go ahead and redo that. Servlet, there we go. Okay, this little checkbox here is reasonably important. Every Java web application needs to have what's called a deployment descriptor that tells the Java web server basically about its existence, so to speak, and what it's there for, things like that. So by clicking this checkbox, we're going to allow NetBeans to create that deployment descriptor for us, and that deployment descriptor is what links our application to Glassfish, our web server. So checking that checkbox is a big deal. Otherwise, we would have to fill that information in manually, which I'll show you what this web.xml file looks like. It's not a big deal. It's pretty easy to learn, but it's generally better to trust your IDE for that. Okay. Now, after what I just said about trusting the IDE, you'll notice that NetBeans fills in a whole ton of stuff into this file, and it's kind of overkill for most of our purposes. So I'm going to start pulling some things out to kind of get down to what the two most important parts of a servlet are. So I'm going to pull out these comments here. And I'm going to pull out this process request method. Basically, what this method is doing, if you look at right here, and you look at the text that's being generated here, this is creating a very, very simple HTML page, just as kind of a, filler. We don't need any of that. We're going to make our own HTML page here. So I can delete that altogether. Delete these comments, delete these comments, this method. The methods that we actually care about, both for the purposes of this demonstration and for the purposes of your Module 5 milestone, are the doGet and the doPost methods. All right, get rid of this filler here also. Now, if you're not familiar with what get and post are referring to, these are HTTP methods. Okay, so if you'll want to have at least some base familiarity with HTTP, hopefully through an introductory web programming course, or maybe even just reading the online reading for Module 5. But the get method is what HTTP uses to request kind of a readable version of a web page, and the post method is what HTTP uses to send data to a remote server. Sorry about that, just need a quick drink there. All right. So in general, the doGet method is where we are going to put the code in our servlet that generates some kind of HTML output. All right, and of course, I highly recommend doing the reading on this because I'm just going to kind of breeze through this. So we have a parameter here that is sent to us by Glassfish. Okay, Glassfish is sending us this HTTP servlet response object. And that HTTP servlet response object is kind of like our output stream, right, from Module 4 when we were accessing the raw data. And in fact, behind the scenes, if you were to look at the code for Glassfish, you would see that this servlet response is actually tied to an output stream object that sends data back to the user's web browser. We can get access to a writing stream for that response, for that output, by calling response.getWriter. And then from the writer object, we can just call print or println, but in HTML, println isn't super useful. All right, and here we can just, this is going to look kind of messy, but here we can actually put in a full-blown HTML document. Don't worry, this is not something that you do on a regular basis. I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. I just want to get something on the page here. Okay. So here we have a string hello world inside of a div, inside of a body, inside of an HTML document. It seems pretty simple, so we'll start with that. So now we have the capability to call this servlet, and in response, this servlet will generate this HTML document and send it to our web browser. So what I'm actually going to do is just right-click inside this file here and click Run File. It's going to ask me if I want to add any optional parameters to this call. I don't. I'm just going to click OK. And this is actually going to launch the page in my web browser once it finishes loading. Usually the first time you run a web app, it can take a second to get going. Let's check out our output. Okay, so it's starting our Glassfish server. I should have started that ahead of time just to be prepared. And Glassfish is doing some stuff over here in a separate output window. All right, so it launched. Let me drag over my browser window here. There we go. All right, we've got our hello world. All right, so I kick that back over to the side. All right. So that's great, but this is something we could have just put in an HTML file and put up on an Apache server or something like that. So this is hardly useful. But how about we create a slightly more sophisticated application that actually receives and saves some data and then displays it back out to the user. Of course, classic with Hello World would be to allow the user to enter their name, and so instead of Hello World, we do hello name, right? So the way we do that is by allowing the user to supply some data through a post method, right? And so we could accept the name that they want to save through a request parameter. And let's say the request parameter is also called name, all right? So basically, the user will submit a post request, and I'll show you how we're going to build that here in just a second. The user will submit a post request with a parameter called name. We will read that parameter from the HTTP request and assign it to the name variable, okay? Now, once the user has entered the name that they like, we need to store that value somehow You could, and I say you could, but really you shouldn't. You could create a private variable for your servlet and do something like this.name equals name, right? And then inside of our output string here, we do as follows, okay? So this is technically doable. User enters a request parameter name. It gets stuck in this local variable. We assign that to a object field, and then we just print it back out in the output. The problem is giving a servlet a private field like this can lead to some complications depending on how your Java web server handles servlet creation. And what I mean by that is if you have, say, a dozen different users running the same web application, it's possible that each user gets its own Hello World servlet object, just like we did in Module 4. Each client connection got its own handle client task. However, there's no guarantee from your Java web server that you as a client will be assigned to a specific Hello World servlet. There could be one Hello World servlet object that is serving all users. And so then they would end up sharing a name field, and that's just not going to work. There's also the possibility that these Hello World servlet objects could get created and destroyed while you are using the application. So if you enter your name once, and then 30 seconds later you go back to the page and it's not there anymore, that's because your original Hello World servlet object is gone. So in general, we don't like to create these private fields for servlets. Okay. Well, then how do we resolve this? All right, so it turns out that Glassfish supports assigning sets of data to a particular user using a particular browser on a particular computer through an object called a session. Okay, so the session object is going to work basically like a temporary data storage for a particular user. Right, so when a user does something like post their name parameter, we can go into the request and access the session object. And then from the session object, we can set a session attribute. We're going to call the session attribute name as well, just to stay consistent. It would be more confusing than helpful. But basically what we're talking about here is a request parameter that is named name. This is from the web page itself, the request parameter named name. And that gets assigned to a Java variable, a string named name. And then that variable will get assigned to a session attribute named name. And we can get rid of this altogether. And once that Java string is assigned to that session attribute, it will stay there for that specific user using that specific browser on that specific computer. So it's tied through, if you're familiar with HTTP session cookies, it's tied by a cookie to your web browser. And so until you close your web browser, go to a different web browser, your session object will be saved on the server. So back over here in the doGet that actually does the displaying, we can access that value again. This time we obtain the session object, and then we do a get attribute. And we want to get the attribute name. Now, there's a little catch here, all right, because technically such an attribute could return any object. You can store any type of object, not just strings, inside of the session attribute because it's all on the Java side. So we actually have to do a cast to string here. And it would also be nice if we check to see, check to make sure that we actually have a name. So the first time we load this page, there won't be a name saved. So we want to do something like the default name if the name in the session is null. Now there's one more thing I've got to throw in here, which is after the user actually does the do post, we need to redirect the user basically to reload the page, right? So when you do a post operation normally, it will not load, it will not call a get method on the page. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you yet. Don't worry about it. It'll kick in. We need to use the response object to do what's called the send redirect. And we're basically going to redirect the user back to the same page. Right? This is basically just forcing them to reload using the get method, which will show them the new data that they just entered. All right. So I'm going to run this again, even though we have not yet provided the ability for the user to actually enter the name parameter somewhere. I just wanted to reload it to show, in fact, that it's still working with the default value, which is the name of the world, right? So we can see that this, if name equals null is catching that, the fact that we haven't set that session attribute yet, and it's setting it to world for us. All right, so now we need to actually give the user the capability to supply a name. And we're going to do that through a regular old HTML form. So that's where this index.html that got generated for us comes in. Give this page a title. Hello world name form. And then inside the body here, we're going to do a form. And if you've taken a web development course, like the web development one here at LCC or something like that, you may have been exposed to building forms, but not yet had the ability to actually integrate them with a backend server. And so that's essentially what we're doing here. So in order to link this HTML form with the backend server, all we have to do provide an action parameter. And that action parameter is going to be the path to our servlet, which is in the root of our web application, so just a /, and it's named Hello World Servlet. And we have to provide a method attribute, which is going to be post, right? Because over here on the servlet side, we specified that this is for handling post requests. Okay. And then inside of our form, we're going to have a label that says enter our name here. And then an input. Next. And a name of name, right? There's name of name again. All right, so that could get somewhat confusing. I apologize for that. But essentially what this is doing is it's assigning a name to our request parameter, okay? So this name right here, right, links to that right there. All right, we could do something like, just to clarify, pname, just a parameter name, right? And then this can be attribute name, attribute name. So I don't know if that clarified anything or not, but lots of name getting thrown around here. All right, but this is giving our request attribute the name of pname. So when it comes through to the server, we will need to get the request parameter pname, right? And that will actually contain the contents of this HTML input field. Okay, so now we've got this index.html rigged up. We can have NetBeans run this in the browser for us as well. Okay, so NetBeans brought that up in my web browser. I'll just type in my name here. I didn't actually put a submit button. I should have. That was an omission on my part. But the nice thing about HTML forms is that you can always just hit enter. And I broke it. Uh-oh. Sorry, guys. I made a mistake here in defining the action string. The hello world servlet is not at the root of our application. Let me show you what I mean by that. Okay. Our entire Java web application is actually inside of a folder called demo web app, which of course is the name of our Java web application. And so by putting that / at the beginning of the action, that kicked us out of the demo web app folder. This should work now. Well then, I don't think I reloaded this onto the server. I think this is a cached response. So let me restart our server here. All right, Glassfish is restarting. I apologize for that. As when in doubt, when you make a change to your Java web application, and that change doesn't seem to make any difference in the code that's running, you may want to restart your Glassfish server to make sure that it has the most up-to-date changes. All right, that green arrow tells me that it's probably good to go. So I'm going to run this again. I'm going to pop back up. Well, now. I apologize, folks. Again, I apologize for this. I'm not sure exactly why it's not directing to the correct page. But what I will do is I'll open up another web browser. Ah, I was barking up the wrong tree the entire time. So this / here is redirecting us back to an absolute path. Basically, it's kicking us out of the demo web app folder. I was looking at the wrong chunk of code for the error. I apologize for that, but I'm probably going to leave it in the video just as a notable lesson. Right? Don't want that / there at all. And we don't want the / here at all either. Let's see if this is caught up now. Okay. That got it. Okay. So let's walk through end to end what's going on here again, right? We have an HTML page, just a basic old HTML with a form, okay? That form will submit to the URL Hello World Servlet inside of our current web application using the HTTP method post. It'll submit one parameter called pname from an input field, text input field. On the server side, our Hello World Servlet will grab that pname request parameter. It will store it in our server-side session, and then the servlet will redirect back to itself, basically to force a refresh of the data. So the browser will basically direct another request to the doGet method after that send redirect. The doGet method will pick up the name attribute from the session, and then it will print out this HTML to the page where the name is inserted in place of the default value, which is world. All right, so hopefully that all came together for you. Obviously, there's a lot more reading to do on this and a lot more examples in the text in Desire to Learn. But hopefully the video is at least a good primer for getting you started with setting up your first Java web application in NetBeans. And of course, any questions or complications with setting up your first web app should be directed to the discussion board so that your classmates can benefit from your struggles, basically. All right, so you can direct your general questions, comments, etc. To Desire to Learn, and I'll get another video up next week on using JSPs.